At dawn plus 4 minutes, the orbital platforms came online, not with thunder, not with light, just a shift in the silence, the kind you feel in your chest before you hear it, the kind that means something has started. Tessarvan's fleet had arrived at Caspian 12 hours earlier. 43 ships, a size that told us everything we needed to know. A small fleet would have meant routine enforcement, confidence, the assumption that a Category 2 species would simply comply, but they sent a large fleet. That meant doubt. Doubt they hadn't spoken aloud, doubt they hadn't even admitted to themselves. The colony was already empty. Helen had seen to that. 3 practice evacuations in the week before. The first took 3 hours and 50 minutes. She wasn't satisfied. The second dropped to 3 hours, 22 minutes. She ran a third after dinner that evening. 3 hours, 9 minutes. When the real sequence began, her people moved like water finding a crack. 1,214 colonists. The children's school was the second group to leave, not the first. Helen had calculated that making children first would create a rush dynamic that slowed the overall time. She was precise about these things. Tessarvan's assessment team found the habitation blocks powered down correctly, food stores sealed, water systems running on automatic maintenance cycles. It didn't look like an evacuation. It looked like everyone had simply finished their work and gone home, except there was no home for them to go to on the surface. The fleet commander filed his initial report. Unexpected but manageable, he transmitted. His voice sat in the highest of the Keth's 12 tonal registers. Certainty, authority, the sound of a being who had never lost anything. Dawn came. His team began standard administrative processing. Then the platforms spoke. They were not weapons. The Conclave's legal language had no word for what they were. Automated consequence systems, Claire had called them in her final report, and the term had stuck because it was the only honest description. They did not target ships, they targeted decisions. Each platform was calibrated to respond to specific actions. Actions the Keth had catalogued across 30 years of observation. Actions their own administrative manuals listed as standard procedure. 17 of those actions happened simultaneously when Tessarvan's assessment team touched the colony's network. The platforms responded, not with destruction. That was deliberate. Destroyed ships became rallying points. Damaged ships became headlines. But a fleet that was simply stopped, all its crew alive, all its commanders still at their stations, every system functional except the ability to move or transmit beyond a 6 light-second radius, that was not a rallying point. That was an education. Tessarvan's next transmission took 17 minutes to arrive. When his voice came through, it had dropped to the 7th register. The register Keth use when speaking to someone they have just understood they underestimated. A long silence followed, the kind of silence that has weight, the kind you feel in your ears. Would you have stayed in that room, or would you have walked out? Because she didn't walk out. 44 years earlier, the chamber was already laughing before Ambassador Yale Duran finished her first sentence. Myra Thorne heard it from the back row. 26 years old, 4 years of work to earn a seat on that diplomatic shuttle, 11 alien languages, 17 security clearances, the full procedural charter of the Galactic Conclave memorized in 3 official translations. All of it added up to a chair in the worst section of the Hall of Weights, far from the central podium, far from the lights, far from anything that mattered. The laugh moved through the concentric arcs of delegations like wind through a pipe, rising and falling. 43 species seated in rings around the speaking floor. The Keth delegate, a tall being with iridescent skin that shifted to gold as he laughed, the Keth color for mild contempt, sat in the first ring, 3 body lengths from the podium. He did not bother to hide his expression. Counselor Vethkor. Myra would learn his name later, along with his patterns, his preferences, the way his skin cycled through colors like a mood ring built by someone with no interest in subtlety. Gold for contempt, silver for dismissive, deep blue for genuine thought, rare, she would note, across 40 years of watching. Maroon for embarrassment, which she would see exactly once. Yale Duran did not flinch. 61 years old, short, close-cropped gray hair, the kind of stillness that people mistake for patience. Myra had worked for her for 4 years. She knew it was not patience. It was calculation. Yale stood at the podium with her hands clasped in front of her and waited for the laughter to finish the way a person waits for rain to pass, not hoping it would stop, simply certain that it would eventually, because everything does. The Hall of Waits, that was what the breath translator had finally called it, after 3 centuries of using the Keth's original name, which translated roughly to the hall where things are decided about you. The distinction mattered. Myra would think about it later, standing in that back row, watching the most important woman she had ever known stand alone at the center of the known galaxy and be laughed at. Yale began again when the sound faded. She presented Earth's application for full membership, defense tier classification, equal access to the protected shipping lanes connecting the inner systems. Her voice was steady, clear, carried no apology. Then came the history. The charter required it. Every applicant species must demonstrate developmental coherence, showing where you had come from and how you had survived getting there. The laughter returned, because the history was difficult to frame. 10,000 years of fighting across continents, weapons capable of ending all life, developed and deployed in smaller forms again and again. An atmosphere poisoned, then rebuilt. Forests stripped, then regrown. Ecosystems collapsed, then restored with the same ferocious energy that had destroyed them. 17 events that should have ended the species. 17, according to Conclave classification standards. Vethkor's translator carried his words to every seat. They nearly eliminated themselves 17 times. They are not a threat. They are simply reckless. His skin shifted to silver. Dismissive. A species that cannot manage its own home world cannot manage itself among the stars. The application is generous in spirit, but the conclave does not extend defense recognition to juvenile civilizations that have not demonstrated the emotional maturity required for partnership. Murmuring across the rings, agreement. Myra looked at Yale. She had not moved. Her hands still clasped, her face still calm. A breath delegate rose to second the Keth assessment. Smaller than the Keth, with layered speaking membranes that gave her voice a soft harmonic quality. Salon. Myra noticed her because she was the only delegate who did not seem amused. She did not look contemptuous either. She looked curious, studying Yale the way a scientist studies something that does not behave according to expectations. The vote was not close, 38-5 with 5 abstentions. Earth was granted Category 2 juvenile species status, trade observation rights, no defense recognition, no weapons treaty access, no shipping lane protections without Keth supervision. The word supervision sat in Myra's chest like a stone. Yale thanked the chamber for its time, gathered her documents, turned and walked back toward their section of the gallery. As she passed through the outer ring, Vethkor spoke one more time, loud enough for her to hear, perhaps intended to be heard, perhaps not. They will spend 20 years arguing among themselves about the result, he said to his aide, in Keth, assuming Yale could not understand. Then they will apply again with a prettier presentation. Yale did not stop walking, but as she passed Myra, Myra saw her face for just 1 second clearly before she arranged it back into its professional stillness. She was not angry, not hurt. She looked like someone who had just confirmed something she had long suspected. She stopped beside Myra and spoke quietly. Write down everything you observed today, every delegate's reaction, every color shift from the Keth, every species that abstained, and write down the exact phrasing Vethkor used, exact words, not summaries. Myra pulled out her recorder. Should I flag it for the Foreign Affairs report? No, Yale said. Flag it for defense research. That was the moment Myra understood that something had shifted, not in the chamber, in them. The shuttle ride home took 11 hours. Myra spent most of it watching Yale work through a set of documents she had not shared with anyone else on the delegation. She could not see the content clearly, just figures and timelines, dense with calculations. But one page, which Yale held slightly longer than the others, had a header Myra managed to read from the angle of her seat. Projected development window, 44 years. She did not ask what it meant. 26 and sharp enough to understand that some questions are best answered by watching rather than asking. Yale Duran was already planning something. She had been planning it before they left Earth. The vote had not surprised her. The laughter had not hurt her. She had needed to hear exactly what the conclave would say, in their own words, on the official record, in the hall where things are decided about you. Now she had it. Myra watched the stars stretch past the viewport. The station shrank behind them. And she thought, the conclave has made a precise and catastrophic error, not the kind that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that only becomes visible years later when you look back and try to identify the exact moment everything changed, and you find it was a moment that looked at the time like nothing at all. It looked like a woman walking out of a chamber with her documents tucked under her arm. It looked like losing. The first thing they told them back on Earth was that the conclave's decision was being processed through diplomatic review. That was the official language. In the hallways of the Foreign Affairs building in London, where Yale held her first closed-door briefing after the vote, the language was different. Myra stood outside that room for 4 hours. When the people inside came out, they looked like people who had been told not the news they feared, but the confirmation of something they had quietly, carefully, already prepared for. Nobody cried. Nobody raised their voice. They got to work. Myra was reassigned 3 days after they landed. Her new position had a title that sounded administrative: Senior Documentation Analyst, Office of Developmental Infrastructure. The office had 6 people. None of them were administrators. One was a physicist who had published more papers on propulsion theory than anyone alive. One was a former special operations planner who now consulted on what she called adaptive response architecture. One was a woman named Claire who had spent 8 years studying Keth psychology and whose official title was cultural liaison, but who spent her days building behavioral models of how the Keth High Council made decisions under pressure. Myra was the youngest person by 11 years. On her first morning, Yale called the 6 of them into a small conference room with no windows, offered coffee, placed a single sheet of paper on the table. 3 sentences. The conclave will not protect us. The conclave has confirmed they do not consider us a threat. We have 44 years before our current population distribution and technology trajectory makes conflict statistically unavoidable. She looked around the table. We are not going to spend those 44 years asking for a seat. We are going to spend them building one. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then the physicist, Grant, his name was Grant, tapped the paper twice with one finger. 44 is the low estimate, he said. I would say 40. Yale nodded. Then we move faster. That was the beginning. At the time, it did not look like the most significant undertaking in human history. It looked like a small group of people in a room without windows, drinking bad coffee, doing paperwork. The paperwork was the cover for everything. Myra poured herself a cup. The coffee had been sitting too long, bitter and lukewarm. She drank it anyway because that was what you did in rooms like this. Yale waited for the steam to clear before she spoke again. Small habit. Myra filed it away. We have 44 years, Yale said. But we don't start from zero, we start from what we are. Grant leaned forward. And what are we? Yale's stillness again. Not patience, calculation. We are the species that survived 17 extinction events. We are the species that rebuilt our atmosphere. We are the species that turned our worst weapons into our best propulsion systems. And we are the species the conclave just decided is not a threat. She set down her coffee. Let's keep them right. The Category 2 classification came with one benefit the Keth had not considered carefully enough: observation rights. Earth was permitted to send a small number of official observers to any non-restricted conclave event, installation, or territory. It was meant to be a courtesy, giving junior species the experience of watching how civilization worked so that in 50 or 100 years, when they were mature enough for real membership, they would already understand the procedures. What it actually did was give humanity access. Grant handled the physics division. Within the first 2 years, working from what their observers had gathered, and what they had quietly reverse-engineered from licensed trade equipment, his team identified 3 theoretical barriers in propulsion engineering that the conclave species had declared impossible to cross. They declared them impossible because their own physics models told them so. Grant's team, approaching the problem without any of that foundational literature, without the academic tradition that had told every conclave physicist for generations that these things could not be done, simply tried anyway. Without knowing they were not supposed to succeed, they succeeded twice in the first 3 years. The third barrier took another 5 years. It produced a drive system that, when tested quietly in the outer asteroid belt, pushed an unmanned probe to a velocity that no licensed conclave vessel could match at standard configuration. Grant left the result in the report with no emphasis on it, just a number in a table. Myra asked him once why he had not highlighted it more clearly. "If we highlight it," Grant said, "someone might ask us to share it." That was the kind of thinking that ran through everything they did in those years. Quiet, deliberate, generous on the surface, careful underneath. Claire's work was harder to measure, but more important in the long run. She built a library of behavioral profiles for every species on the conclave with defense tier status. Not profiles of their technology, profiles of their psychology. What frightened them? What embarrassed them? What they valued so deeply that threatening it would produce irrational decisions? What made them hesitate? What made them overcommit? The Keth, she determined, operated on a status model that was almost mathematically predictable. They responded to public challenge with immediate and disproportionate force, but only when witnesses were present. Alone or in small groups, they were cautious, conservative. They perform aggression, she wrote in one of her reports. They don't prefer it. The performance is for the audience. Remove the audience and they're actually quite reasonable. She also noted, in the same report, that the Keth had never in their recorded history fought an opponent who did not flinch. Myra read that line 3 times. The terraforming program was announced publicly, with full conclave notification. Earth was permitted to expand within 7-star systems under their Category 2 designation. They announced an ambitious civilian colonization effort across 4 of them. The conclave observed this with no particular concern. Colonization was normal. It was what junior species did with their energy when they were not yet capable of anything more sophisticated. What the conclave did not observe was what the colony ships carried in addition to settlers. Every colony ship had 2 full manifests. One was submitted to the conclave observation office. The other was filed in an archive that existed on no connected network. The second manifest listed the additional structural components that every colony installation included in its foundation layer. Not weapons, not military hardware, nothing a passing inspection would flag. Instead, every colony was built on a platform architecture that could, with a software deployment that took 48 seconds, become something else entirely. Myra designed the filing system for those second manifests. She spent 3 years on it. The filing system was, in her professional opinion, the most boring and most important thing she had ever built. She was 29 when she finished the first version. She had a small scar on her left palm now, a paper cutter year 3 deep enough to leave a mark. She caught herself rubbing it sometimes when she was thinking. The scar had healed smooth, but the pressure against her thumb reminded her of the afternoon it happened. Blood on white paper. Grant shouting for a medic. Yale watching, still as ever saying nothing. Myra kept working. That was year 3. Year 5, Claire's behavioral models went into active use. The first observer mission to a conclave defense committee session. Myra went as documentation support. She sat in a secondary gallery and watched Claire watch the Keth. Their skin shifted through colors like a conversation Myra could not yet read. Gold when a rival species proposed something. Deep blue when the numbers contradicted their position. Silver when they dismissed a concern. Claire took notes without looking at her pad. Typing by touch, eyes on the delegates. Vethkor just shifted to maroon, Myra whispered. Claire's fingers paused. That's embarrassment. What did he hear? The Alluri delegate mentioned a trade agreement the Keth signed 3 years ago. Said the terms were being violated. Claire wrote something. The Keth signed a bad deal and got caught. He's embarrassed because his own team missed the violation. Watch the aide on his left. Myra watched. The aide's skin cycled gold, silver, gold. Contempt, dismissive, contempt. He's angry at the aide, Claire said. Not at the alluri. The alluri are too small to matter. The aide should have caught it. The Keth outsource their attention to subordinates. That's a lever. Myra made a note. Lever, Keth attention is hierarchical. Pressure the aide, pressure the delegate. She filed it in the second manifest archive. Not the same archive. A different one, the behavioral library. Year 7. Grant came to the Tuesday briefing with a cup of coffee and a sheet of paper. The drive systems are ready for colony deployment, he said. We can put them in the foundation layer without modifying the submitted manifests. The inspection protocols don't scan for propulsion signatures in structural components. Yale took the paper, read it, handed it back. Do it. Grant nodded. One more thing. The 7th generation, the one that exceeds conclave standard, we can't test that fully without detection. The signature is too distinct. Then don't test it, Yale said. Model it, simulate it, build it in pieces and assemble in the colony bays. By the time anyone detects it, we'll have 17 of them. 17. Myra wrote it down. The number kept appearing. 17 extinction events. 17 colonies planned for the first wave. 17 seconds of silence after the Keth delegation voted against them. She did not believe in coincidence. She believed in planning. Year 8, the Tuesday morning rhythm had settled into something almost domestic. Grant brought pastries sometimes. Claire arrived exactly 7 minutes early and arranged her papers in a precise grid. Myra made the coffee because she was the youngest, and because she had learned that if she made it, it was drinkable. Yale sat in the chair by the window, her chair now, though no one had formally assigned it. The window faced a brick wall. There was nothing to see. She looked at it anyway. Aaron sent an observation report from the conclave station, Myra said, setting out the printouts. The Keth are running a scan of shared relay communications. They found something. Yale turned from the window. What did they find? Administrative redundancy. Our filing system, the public one. They described it as evidence of poor organizational management. Claire snorted, that's the point. Yale was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. Not a large smile, just a small movement at the corner of her mouth. How long until they realize the redundancy is the architecture? Myra checked her notes. Their current scan protocols don't flag pattern repetition as intentional. They see inefficiency. They won't look deeper unless someone tells them to. Will someone tell them to? Myra thought about the breath delegate who had studied Yale from across the chamber 8 years ago. Salon, still curious, still watching. Maybe, Myra said. Not yet. Yale picked up her coffee. Then we have time. Year 10, Myra finally asked Grant about the number. 44 years, she said. Why 44? Grant was soldering something at his bench. He did not look up. Population distribution models, technology trajectory, resource allocation. Yale ran the numbers before the vote. She knew what the conclave would say before they said it. She needed them to say it on the record. And if they had said yes, Grant set down the soldering iron, turned to face her. Then the 44-year window would have been a different kind of window. We would have had a seat at the table. We would have used it. But they said no. They said no. Grant picked up the soldering iron again. So now we build our own table. Year 12, Caspian 4 foundation layer included the first full deployment of the platform architecture. Myra checked the second manifest herself, line by line. The old habit, already old. The colony was designated for agricultural research. Its public mission statement mentioned soil adaptation and hydroponic efficiency. The private mission statement, the one that existed only in Myra's filing system, mentioned something else. Platform readiness, 89%. Awaiting software deployment package V42, ETA 11 seconds from authorization. Range, full orbital envelope, 11 seconds. She closed the file. Year 15. Claire brought a new report to the Tuesday briefing. The Keth have no contingency model for an opponent who doesn't stop, she said. I ran 73 simulations. Every time the Keth side assumed the opponent would reach a rational break point, resource depletion, casualty threshold political pressure. The human side, modeled on our historical data, never hit that break point. Not because we're irrational, because our threshold is different. Their threshold is lower, Grant said. Their threshold is lower, Claire agreed. They've never fought anyone who kept going past the point where any Keth commander would have surrendered. They don't have language for it. They don't have tactics for it. They don't have a strategic framework that includes it. Myra wrote it down. No contingency for an opponent who doesn't stop. She rubbed her palm scar. Yale looked at Claire. How do we make sure they don't develop that framework before we're ready? Claire's smile was thin. We don't let them see us, not really. We let them see what they expect to see: disorganized, reckless, juvenile, a species that survived 17 extinction events through luck and stubbornness, not strategy. And when they finally see us, Claire shrugged, by then it won't matter. Year 18, the Tuesday morning rhythm broke. Grant's granddaughter was born. He came in late, which never happened, and when he arrived, he had a photograph in his hand. A small human, red-faced and screaming, wrapped in a white cloth. Her name is Alina, Grant said. She's going to fly on the 7th-generation drives. He set the photograph on the table. No one said anything for a moment. Then Yale reached out and turned the photograph so it faced the room. Then we'd better finish them. Year 20, Myra sat in the windowless conference room and reviewed the second manifest archive. 17 colonies now. 17 foundation layers. 17 platform deployments, each one tested and retested, each one capable of the 11-second transition. She thought about the number, 17. She had started counting it when she was 26, sitting in the back row of the Hall of Weights, watching Yale Duran be laughed at. 17 extinction events, 17 seconds of silence after the vote, 17 colonies. She rubbed her scar. 17. She closed the archive and walked down the hall to the coffee machine. The building was quiet at this hour. Most of the administrative staff had gone home, but the lights were still on in the conference room, and through the gap in the door, she could see Claire and Grant arguing about something on a whiteboard. Numbers, equations, a diagram that looked like a decision tree folded in on itself. Yale sat in her chair by the window. The brick wall was still there. Myra poured herself a cup. The coffee was fresh. Grant had started making it last year, after Myra mentioned that the old machine was leaving a burnt taste. He had replaced it without telling anyone. Just came in one Tuesday with a new machine and a box of filters. The small things. She walked back to the conference room, set the coffee down, looked at the whiteboard. We're ahead of schedule, Claire said without turning around. The behavioral library has 17 species now, full profiles, including the breath. The breath are allies, Myra said. The breath are curious, Claire corrected. Curiosity can be a weapon or a gift, depends on what they find. Myra thought about S. Salon, the breath delegate who had watched Yale across the chamber 20 years ago, who had filed a minority report that no one read. Is anyone looking at the breath archive? Claire turned. Her expression was careful. The breath archive is where minority reports go to die. No one looks at it. That's the point. So if someone filed a report that mattered, no one would see it until it was too late. Myra sat down. She rubbed her scar. Good, she said. Year 22. The colonies had multiplied again. 17 became 23. The conclave observation reports noted the expansion with mild interest, junior species, energetic, unfocused. They did not note the pattern. Every new colony was positioned along a vector that, when mapped, formed an arc around Keth space. Not threatening, not even close, just present, just waiting. Myra tracked the coordinates in her archive. The second manifests grew thicker every year. The software deployment window dropped from 11 seconds to 9. Grant grumbled about it. 9 is fine, he said. I wanted 8. Claire reminded him that 8 seconds would require a hardware revision across all 23 colonies. Grant said he had already designed the revision. Yale asked how long. Grant said 2 years. Do it, Yale said. That was the Tuesday briefing. The brick wall outside the window was still there. Myra had started to think of it as a kind of clock, not changing, just present, watching. Year 25. The Alluri made contact, not through official channels, through a medical research exchange that Grant's wife had started 15 years ago, quietly, without fanfare, because the Alluri breeding population had collapsed and human fertility science had solved a problem that conclave medicine had declared unsolvable. The Alluri remembered. They were a small trading civilization, observer status only, no defense recognition, no political weight, but they had ears, and they had gratitude. The message arrived on a Tuesday. Myra printed it and placed it in the center of the conference table. "We remember who helped us when our breeding population collapsed," it said. "We will not forget." No request, no offer, just a statement. Yale read it twice, then she looked at Claire. "What do the Alluri know?" Claire had been expecting the question. "They trade with everyone. Their ships move through Keth space, breath space, Drath space. They hear things. They don't repeat them usually, but they might repeat them to us. Because we saved their species. Because we saved their species." Yale nodded, "Then we listen." Year 27. Grant's hardware revision deployed across the colony network. The deployment window dropped to 8 seconds. Grant was not satisfied. He had already started work on the next revision. Claire told him he was obsessive. Grant said that was the point. Myra was 47. She had stopped counting the scars on her hands, not injuries, just the accumulated nicks of decades in the archive. Paper cuts, mostly. A burn from the old coffee machine before Grant replaced it. A scrape from a filing cabinet that had been in the same spot for 20 years and which she still forgot to avoid. She rubbed her left palm, the old scar from year 3, still smooth, still there. Oliver was 29 now. He had been a child when she first joined the office, the son of a diplomat she had worked with in the early years before the reassignment. He had grown up knowing what the second manifests were. Not the details, not the locations, but the shape of it. The understanding that there was a layer beneath the layer. He was stationed at the Conclave Research Exchange now, senior observer. His reports came through Myra's archive every week. Dry, precise, generous on the surface. Beneath the surface, he was counting. Year 30, 23 colonies became 31. The Keth had started to notice. Not the colonies themselves, those were still within the permitted expansion zones, but the pattern, the way the colonies were positioned, the way they seemed to anticipate Keth trade routes, Keth patrol schedules, Keth administrative boundaries. Vethkor had retired. His successor, a delegate named Kor, was younger, less certain. He had inherited a system that had worked for 200 years and was showing the first signs of strain. The Alluri were trading with human colonies directly now, bypassing Keth middlemen. The Breath had started asking questions in committee sessions, polite questions, procedural questions, but questions that suggested someone was reading the archives. Someone was reading the archives. Myra thought about S. Salon, the Breath delegate who had watched Yale from across the chamber 30 years ago, who had filed a minority report that no one read. She wondered if anyone had read it yet. Year 32. Oliver's report crossed Myra's desk on a Tuesday morning. A Breath delegate had requested access to the minority report archive, not the active files, the deep archive, the one where reports went to die. The request was procedural, unremarkable. The Breath were archival by nature. They requested access to old files all the time. But this request was different. The delegate's name was Tella. She was 24 years old. Her grandmother had been S. Salon. Myra read the name 3 times. She called Claire. "Tella," Claire said, "S. Salon's granddaughter. She's requesting access to the minority report archive." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Which report?" "All of them, but specifically the ones filed between 2247 and 2250, the year of the vote." "She's looking for her grandmother's report," Claire said. "She's looking for something," Myra agreed. "We need to know what she finds." Year 33. Tella found the report. Oliver's transmission arrived at 4:00 a.m. London time. Myra was awake. She had stopped sleeping through the night sometime around year 25. She read the message standing in her kitchen in the dark, with the glow of the screen making strange shadows on the wall. S. Salon's minority report, 40 years old, filed 3 days after the vote. It said, "These creatures do not plan for war. They plan for having already lost one. I do not know what to do with this observation, but I believe it is important." That was all. Myra read it again. Then she called Yale. Yale answered on the second ring. She had been awake too. "The Breath have the report," Myra said. "What are they doing with it?" "Tella is reading it into the record at the next committee session. She's not hiding it. She's putting it in the open." Yale was quiet for a long moment. "Then it begins. Year 35. The Tuesday briefings had changed. Not the room, not the coffee, not the brick wall, but the people. Grant was 72 now. He came in 3 days a week, spent the other 4 writing what he called his personal notes, actually a 6th-generation manual for the drive systems, updated obsessively with every new piece of test data. Claire's daughter had started attending briefings. She was 23, finishing her doctoral thesis on Keth decision-making under stress, the same subject her mother had studied 30 years ago. Myra was 55. She ran the documentation division now, a title that meant nothing and everything. The second Manifest archive had grown to 47 colonies across 11 star systems. The software deployment window was down to 4 seconds. Grant had stopped apologizing for not reaching his targets. "The drives are ready," he said one Tuesday. 7th generation, fully deployed across all colonies. The Keth could scan every ship and every platform and every installation for the next 10 years. They would find what we let them find. "And what do we let them find?" Claire asked. Grant's smile was thin. "Enough to be interesting, not enough to be threatening." Yale looked at the brick wall. She was 78 now. She still came into the office every Tuesday. Still sat in the chair by the window. How long until they realized the difference? Grant shrugged. "That depends on who's looking." Year 36, someone was looking. The Keth Intelligence Division ran a routine scan of human communications logs passing through the Conclave's shared relay. They found administrative redundancy, poor organizational management, evidence of a species still learning how to run an interstellar infrastructure. They filed a report. The report was archived. No one read it. But Claire read it. She had access to the Keth archive now, not through official channels, through a back door that Grant's team had built into the relay system in year 27. The Keth had never checked. They assumed the relay was secure. Claire printed the report and brought it to the Tuesday briefing. "They found the public manifests," she said. "They think we're disorganized." Yale read the report, handed it back. "Are they going to look deeper?" "Not yet, they're satisfied." Yale nodded. "Then we have time." But Myra noticed something. Yale's hands resting on the table had shifted. Not a flinch, not a tremor, just a small adjustment, fingers interlacing, thumbs pressing together. She had never seen Yale do that before. Year 38. Vethkor's successor made a mistake. Kor stood in the Hall of Weights and announced that 3 human colony worlds fell within a newly defined Keth territorial boundary. Under the terms of Earth's Category 2 classification, the installations would be subject to Keth administrative oversight with immediate effect. The official notification arrived on a Tuesday morning. Yale was in her chair reading a book. She set the book down when Myra read the notification aloud. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Which 3? Myra told her. Caspian 4 was one of them. Yale nodded slowly, picked her book back up. "Then it begins," she said, and turned the page. Myra felt it then. Not patience, not calculation, something faster, something in her hands and in her chest and behind her eyes. They were ready. Year 39. The evacuation drills began. Helen, the colony administrator at Caspian 4, ran the first sequence in the morning. 3 hours 50 minutes. She ran it again after lunch. 3 hours 22 minutes. She ran it a third time after dinner. 3 hours 9 minutes. She was not satisfied. She ran it again the next morning. 3 hours 7 minutes. "The children," she said to Myra over a secure channel. "They're the bottleneck, not because they're slow, because the parents slow down for them. What's your solution? Train the children first. Separate drills. They learn the route, the timing, the protocols. Then the parents learn to keep up with them instead of the other way around." "Will it work?" Helen was quiet for a moment. "It worked in the simulation. We'll find out." Year 40, the fleet arrived. Tesarvan's 43 ships entered Caspian 4 orbit at 600 local time. The colony was already empty. The evacuation had taken 3 hours, 9 minutes. Helen's final run, the one that had worked in the simulation, the one that required the children to lead and the parents to follow. 1,214 colonists, every single one. The assessment team found the habitation blocks powered down correctly, food stores sealed, water systems running on automatic maintenance cycles. It looked like everyone had simply finished their work and gone home. Tesarvan filed his initial report, unexpected but manageable. His voice sat in the highest register, certainty, authority. Myra listened to the transmission from the operations center. She was 66 now, too old for field work, but she had built the relay connection that kept her in the room, a small room adjacent to the colony's primary water processing unit, the last place any inspection would look. Helen stood beside her, 43 years old, 11 years on the colony, 2 children in the school 300 meters away. "They're going to wait for dawn," Helen said. "How do you know?" "Because their manual says to wait for dawn. Standard administrative procedure. Assessment in daylight, processing at first light, report by noon." Myra looked at the clock. "Dawn is 4 hours away." Helen nodded. "I know." Dawn came. Tesarvan's team began standard administrative processing. At dawn plus 4 minutes, the orbital platforms came online. Myra watched the feed. The platforms were not weapons. They were automated consequence systems, each one calibrated to respond to specific actions. Actions the Keth had cataloged across 40 years of observation. Actions their own administrative manuals listed as standard procedure. 17 of those actions happened simultaneously when Tesarvan's assessment team touched the colony's network. The platforms responded, not with destruction, with precision, with proportion, with the quiet, inexorable logic of a system designed by people who had spent 4 decades watching and learning and waiting. Tesarvan's next transmission took 17 minutes to arrive. When his voice came through, it had dropped to the 7th register, the register Keth use when speaking to someone they have just understood they underestimated. Myra rubbed her scar. "Call Aaron," she said. "It's time." Aaron arrived 6 hours later, 38 years old, the document case in his hand, worn leather-dented corner. He had carried it to every negotiation for the past decade. The dents told the story: Geneva, Mars Station, the Alluri trade talks, the Breath cultural exchange. Each dent a conversation, each conversation a thread. He set the case on the table in the Keth orbital negotiation suite, opened it, placed a single folder in front of Tesarvan. Inside was a ceasefire proposal, 4 pages, polite, comprehensive. It had been written 2 years earlier. Tesarvan looked at the document for a long time. His skin shifted, gold to silver to deep blue, thoughtful. He looked at Aaron. "You prepared this before we arrived." "We prepared it before you announced the boundary," Aaron said. Tesarvan looked at the document again. "How long before?" 2 years. The silence that followed lasted 40 seconds. For a Keth, who processes social information at twice the speed of a human, 40 seconds is a very long time. "We will consider the proposal," Tesarvan said finally. Aaron nodded. "Of course, there is no deadline on our end." The conclave emergency session convened within the week. Kor, now the senior Keth delegate, filed a formal complaint. Earth had deployed weapons systems at Caspian 4, a Category 2 species violating its classification status, a threat to galactic stability. The language was confident. The language was designed for an audience. Tella, the Breath delegate, asked for the floor. She was 28 now. She had spent the past 5 years reading the Minority Report archive. Not just her grandmother's report, all of them. 4 decades of observations, warnings, dismissed concerns. She had cross-referenced every document against the official record. She had built a timeline of what the conclave had been told and what the conclave had chosen to ignore. She brought 3 documents to the session: her grandmother's Minority Report, Tesarvan's assessment of Caspian 4, and the human observer's submission, calm and factual, with an appendix listing every conclave session at which Keth delegates had publicly described human beings as non-threatening. She read them into the record. Not summaries, the full documents. Every word. The chamber was quiet because the chamber did not know what to do with documents they had never read that were clearly relevant and clearly old. I am not saying the Keth are incorrect that something significant happened at Caspian 4, Tella said. I am saying that 40 years ago, a breath analyst identified that something significant was coming. We filed her report in an archive and did not read it. I am asking what else we have filed in archives and not read. Core's skin shifted 3 times in quick succession, a pattern Myra did not recognize. Claire told her later it was the Keth equivalent of someone taking a very long breath. The inventory arrived on a Wednesday. Every ship, every platform, every installation, all listed, all operational. The numbers were correct. The numbers were also, by conclave estimation standards, impossible. Core called an immediate closed session of the Defense Committee. The Defense Committee had not met in closed session in 11 years. They were in the room for 6 hours. Aaron transmitted the inventory with a cover letter 3 sentences long. No threats, no ultimatums, no emotional language. Please find attached the full inventory of Earth's defensive infrastructure as requested. All listed systems are operational. We remain available for discussion at your convenience. The Keth response was immediate. Another formal complaint, illegal military development, deception, violating the spirit of the Category 2 classification. The language was strong. The language was designed for an audience. The audience was not impressed, because Tella had put S. Salon's report into the record. And once it was in the record, other delegates had read it. And once they had read it, several of them had gone looking for other things in the archive. They found 14 minority reports and 3 observer assessments, each flagging something specific about human behavior that the main chamber had declined to act on. Together, the pattern was not the pattern of a reckless juvenile species. It was the pattern of a species that had been watching and learning and preparing for a very long time. Core called for a unified enforcement response. 9 species abstained. That had never happened before in response to a Keth call for unity. Not once. One of the abstaining species sent a private transmission to Earth's diplomatic office the same afternoon. The Alluri. We remember who helped us when our breeding population collapsed. We will not be part of this. Myra read the transmission. She was 67 years old. She cried. She was not ashamed of it. Core did not call for a vote. He had counted. The count was not favorable. Instead, he demanded direct negotiation. Earth's senior diplomatic representation. A smaller room. He wanted to establish dominance. He got Aaron. Aaron arrived at the negotiation table on the conclave station with a team of 4. He was 39. He had a small scar above one eyebrow from a shuttle incident 3 months earlier. He was irrationally proud of it. He sat down across from Core and 4 senior Keth delegates. Waited for them to begin. Core opened by stating that the Keth Dominion recognized Earth's clear technical capabilities and was prepared to discuss a revised framework acknowledging Earth's developmental progress. He did not use the phrase Category 2. That took courage. Aaron said that was very kind. Earth was also prepared to discuss a revised framework. He opened his document case. Inside was a folder containing a copy of the original Conclave Charter, annotated with 17 specific clauses highlighted. We have identified several areas where we believe clarification would be mutually beneficial, Aaron said, specifically around the rights and protections of species in the process of status transitions, the definition of defensive infrastructure under current law, and the review mechanism for decisions made under Category 2 designations. He paused. We have also prepared a draft amendment to the Charter's first recognition clause. It is short. We thought the language was clear, but we are open to refinement. Core looked at the annotated Charter. His skin cycled through 3 colors. You intend to renegotiate the Charter. We intend to improve it, Aaron said. The Keth delegation asked for a recess. They got one. They used it to call Tessarvan, who was still in orbit above Caspian 4. They wanted his read. Tessarvan had actually spoken with Aaron. He had watched the platforms activate. He had felt his voice drop to the 7th register and had not been able to stop it. His report to Kor was transmitted on a channel the Keth believed was secure. It was not secure. "Do not make them angry," Tessarvan said. "They are not angry now, keep it that way." Kor returned to the table. Over the following 3 weeks, something happened that no one expected. The Keth, stripped of their audience and stripped of the comfortable fiction that Earth was manageable, turned out to be, as Claire had written long ago, actually quite reasonable. Kor was not a bad being. He had grown up in a system where the Keth were central and everything else was peripheral. He had never seriously questioned it because the system had always rewarded him for not questioning it. Faced with evidence that the system had a flaw, and faced with an opponent who was not trying to humiliate him, he adapted. Not quickly, not happily, but genuinely. The Caspian 4 colonies were discussed. The other 2 installations were discussed. The Keth boundary declaration was formally retracted. The 3 colonies would remain under Earth's administration, with a joint monitoring arrangement that meant very little additional oversight. The agreement was signed on a Friday. Myra was in the relay room when it came through. She printed a copy and walked down the hall to the conference room with no windows, the room where it had all started. She put the copy in the center of the table where Yale's coffee cup usually sat. Yale was not there. It was not a Tuesday. Myra called her. Yale listened to the summary, asked 3 precise questions about the wording of 2 specific clauses, said the wording was acceptable. Then she was quiet for a moment. "The charter amendment," she said. "First reading in 6 weeks. Tella is sponsoring it." Yale said something soft. Myra almost missed it. "Good girl." Not condescending. Proud. The way you are proud of someone you have never met but whose grandmother you remember. The charter amendment passed 6 weeks later, 41 votes to 2. No abstentions. The 2 who voted against were a small isolationist civilization called the Drath. They voted against everything on principle. The amendment said, in language that had taken 3 months to agree on, "No species, regardless of classification tier, shall address this body without the full weight of its words being recorded, reviewed, and formally considered within 90 days of delivery." A procedural sentence, the kind that lives in appendices. Most beings would walk past it without reading. It would change everything. Because the next species to stand at that podium and present their history, with all its scars and wrong turns and evidence of having nearly failed, would not be laughed at. Their words would be recorded, reviewed, heard. Yale watched the vote from the gallery. She was 82. She used a cane. She sat in a seat that had been reserved for her, something Tella had arranged without being asked. She did not stand at the podium. She had made sure of that. She had asked Tella to sponsor the amendment. She had asked Aaron to negotiate it. She had asked Myra to draft the filing language. She knew what happened when a human stood at that podium. She wanted the amendment passed, without the Keth being able to frame it as a human demand. The vote passed. Yale stood up, walked to the gallery railing, looked down at the chamber where she had been laughed at 40 years ago. Myra watched from the documentation booth. She saw Yale's face for just 1 second, the same expression she had seen in 2247 when Yale had walked past her in the back row. Not anger, not hurt. Confirmation. Yale Duran died at 88. The last 5 years of her life, she served as an informal advisor to the Conclave's New Emerging Species Committee, a body that had not existed before Caspian 4 and now had 12 full-time staff, and a mandate to ensure that no species arriving at the Hall of Weights for the first time would be met with silence or amusement, or the smooth, confident certainty of beings who had decided what you were before you opened your mouth. Her official memorial was held in London. Diplomatic representatives from 19 species attended, the most of any human state funeral in history. Tella sent a personal message. It was read aloud. Kor, who had retired from the Keth delegation and was now an academic, sent a handwritten note through the physical courier system, the form of message humans considered most sincere. "She was patient with us when we had not earned it," Kor wrote. "I do not have a word in my language for what that is. Perhaps you do. Myra sat in the third row. She was 79. Oliver sat beside her, now 52, with gray at his temples and the same calm precision he had shown as a young observer. Aaron sat on her other side, 50 now, with more scars from more shuttle incidents. Claire's daughter sat in the row behind her. Grant's granddaughter, finishing her doctoral thesis on the 7th-generation drive systems, sat in the back. Myra looked at the empty chair at the front of the room. They had placed it beside the podium, where Yale's photograph sat. She thought about 40 years in a room without windows, about second manifests and behavioral libraries, and the look on Tessarvan's face when his voice dropped to the 7th register, about a young breath delegate reading a dead woman's minority report into the galactic record. She thought about the laugh that had filled the Hall of Weights in 2247, how it had felt, what it had produced, what the woman at the center of it had decided to do with it. She thought about what it means to be underestimated, not the sting of it, not the unfairness of it, the practical fact of it. When someone looks at you and decides you are not a threat, they stop watching. And the moment they stop watching is the moment you begin to build. Not a weapon, not a force, something quieter, a record, a list, a room full of people who know in their bones that problems that nearly end you are still problems that you survived. That the scars are not evidence of fragility. They are evidence of the opposite. They are the ledger of everything that came at you full force and found out. Myra reached up and rubbed her palm. The scar was still smooth, still there. She had checked the second manifest archive that morning, line by line. Old habit. The document case sat on a small table near the podium. Yale's case. The worn leather, the dented corner. Aaron had brought it. Inside was not a ceasefire proposal now, not an inventory, not a charter amendment. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Myra had put it there that morning. It said, "We go back and we keep working." After the memorial, Myra walked out into the London afternoon. The sky was gray, ordinary, fine. Oliver walked beside her. They did not say much. The street was narrow and full of people going about their days. A woman with a shopping bag, a man on a phone, a child laughing at something Myra could not see. After a while, Oliver said, "What do we do now?" Myra thought about the draft, the 2 votes against the amendment, the seed bank conversation that had started 3 years ago and was still ongoing. Nobody was a lost cause. Claire had written that 30 years ago. Some simply were not ready yet. She thought about the 14 minor species who had reached out after Caspian 4, needing help navigating the conclave, about the 3 charter provisions that still left gaps in emergency protections, about a young woman somewhere, maybe already born, who would one day stand at the center of a hall on some station they had not built yet, and say words that the room would not yet be ready to hear, and would do so without flinching, because the systems they had built would ensure that the words were recorded, reviewed, heard. She thought about what it means to plan not for the world you are standing in, but for the world you are trying to build. Slower, harder, requires a kind of faith that is less about certainty and more about deciding that the work is worth doing regardless. She said, "The same thing we always do." Oliver glanced at her. "We go back," Myra said, "and we keep working." He nodded. They turned the corner. The London street was gray and narrow, and full of people going about their days.